Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association podcast. I'm Erik Weisseth.
I'm Jack Hurdy.
And I'm Hardy Bender.
Hardy's joining us this week to talk about our annual meeting. But first, just everything we're going to be covering over this episode. We got annual meeting coming up, Explore Act fee delays, the Roadless Rule rescission that everybody's talking about, U.S. Forest Service changes on fire authority, state fire budgets, the fall steelhead and Chinook counts, and, a proposed rule from the Oregon State Marine Board that's going to impact some folks, especially looking at you, Hell's Canyon. So lots of fun stuff to talk about. But first, the annual meeting in December is going to be here before we know it. Hardy, what do you got?
So we are going to have an amazing annual meeting. It's going to be over in at the Tamarack Resort, just outside of Donnelly and McCall, Idaho. We got a jam-packed session of speakers and interesting content that is going to be vital for your business, and a lot of updates that really are important. So we encourage everybody to go ahead and book early. And to that end, we have a early bird discount pricing that is going to come to an end at the end of this month. So go ahead and get your early tickets now. That way you save yourself a couple bucks along the way. As we get ready to get over to Tamarack Resort, we actually have scheduled some flights from the Lemhi Valley out of Salmon through our friends at Jim Air. So if you're coming anywhere from the Lemhi Valley, reach out to Jim Air, and they're coordinating those flights, and we can get you over a little bit early. You can download the IOGA podcast, get a little listen in on the way, and then come meet us there, and we'll have transportation to Tamarack as well for you. The lodging this year is kind of interesting. It's a bigger resort, a little bit bigger than we were last year in Wallace. So the pricing might seem a little high at first, but we encourage all of y'all to just buddy up, because the price comes down to a pretty reasonable price if you end up rooming with some of your other outfitters, because they have kitchenettes, lodges with multiple bedrooms. So you're not sharing a loft bedroom, but there's a great way to find some discounts by booking early and sharing rooms with your friends if you can.
I was going to say, the pricing actually is pretty reasonable with the discounts they gave us, but you can make it even more reasonable. Like, a lot of these are condos where you've got multiple bedrooms. So, 3-bedroom condo with a shared kitchen and living room and that kind of thing. And so you can go in with your outfitter buddies and each get your own bedroom. And not only does it make it very affordable, but it's also probably the most best way to do it, just from a fun standpoint. So we're really looking forward to it. I just today was actually working on some sessions with some folks on things that, I read their session descriptions and I personally got excited to go to them, dealing with everything from intro to digital marketing for outfitters to advanced uses of AI to automate your basically operations management in your business, which was super cool reading about what this guy's going to talk about. All sorts of updates on everything, you'd normally expect from IOGA. But we got a lot of really fun sessions coming, so this is going to be a great year. I'm really excited about it.
And we're going to have all those classic things that y'all have known to come and love, like the cowboy poetry. We're going to have our little exhibitor fair night with vendors. And to that end, vendors' packets will be coming out here in the next couple of weeks. We're just dialing in the final bits of the budget, and we will send you out packets to register to exhibit at the event. And you can look for that here in the next 2 weeks.
Awesome. Well, like I said, if you're going to come, which everybody who listens to this almost certainly is, get registered early here before the end of the month and save yourself a little bit of money. And then we will see you at Tamarack, hopefully with a little bit of snow in early December. All right.
I'm excited.
Yeah. It's going to be fun. I think this is going to be a fun one here in the middle of the state.
Erik, did I hear that there's a big after party at your house too?
Yeah, just down the road. No, we're gonna rage over here at my tiny little house. Nice. It should be awesome. Yeah,
I'll be there.
After party at Jeff Bitten's house too, everyone.
Yeah, actually, Jeff's house is closer, so maybe we'll just go there instead.
Starting at 2 a.m.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, Deb will just be getting up for the day, so actually, it'd be kind of perfect. Awesome. Well, moving on to the next thing. So if you are an outfitter operating on Forest Service land, you probably received a letter sometime in the last week or so letting you know that conversations around fee structures that were maybe going to come for this operating season are not going to happen for this operating season. So especially if you're on the Salmon Chalice or Payette, you would have received some communication before the season talking about transitions to a fee options. So one of those was going to be a predetermined fee option, so your traditional 3%, or a possible $6 per person per day option, and you get to choose between the two, which is stemming from Explore Act implementation. The Forest Service has slowed down the implementation of that Explore Act predetermined fee concept, and that will not be available for operators this season. So for your use billing coming from this operating summer season, you should anticipate or budget for, or just simply expect at this point, that you're going to be paying based on the traditional models that you paid, which for most people is some version of 3% of their adjusted gross revenue. So for this season, expect that. Now, that doesn't mean this is stopped, not going forward, etc. The Forest Service does have to do something between now and early January. In early January, their predetermined fee option will default to $6 per person per day based on the legislation if they do not come up with some alternate option. I know they are working on that. I expect we'll see something this fall, but for now, just expect that you're going to be based off, it's going to be what you've always done, some version of 3% of AGR for most folks. So there you go. For a while, we were kind of wondering what was happening, and we were reaching out to the Forest Service, and they, from the DC office, finally got back to everybody and let them know that they're just not moving forward with it right now. There you go. All right, check. The other big thing that everybody's talking about, because it is, I think, a big deal, is the roadless rule rescission. You just posted a great update on the IOGA blog about it. We'll be sending out in the newsletter, but do you want to kind of give everybody the high-level view of what's happening?
Yeah, this has kind of been the big news item of the last couple of days. And we've had some folks reaching out to ask what this actually means. So people that have been following along might remember a little less than a year ago, the Forest Service announced that they were going to move forward to rescind the 2001 Roadless Rule, which is the national rule. They just published the actual proposed rule itself. So this is like the actual action to start that process. So there's the rule itself, and then there's a draft EIS that's looking at the impact of the rule rescission. They'll have a comment period that's open until September 21st, and then they're trying to make a final decision on it by the end of the year. And we assume that that final decision will be full repeal of the 2001 Roadless Rule. So a couple things that's worth, I think, repeating. So this doesn't affect Idaho. Idaho has its own roadless rule. We developed in 2008 thanks to Senator Risch, who was governor at the time. That Idaho roadless rule manages 9.3 million acres of national forest land in Idaho, and it applies 5 different themes of management to that land, starting with wildland recreation, which is the most restrictive, all the way down to general forest. So it's kind of a gradated scale there. I think it's worth keeping in mind that Idaho rule is a regulation. It's not statute. So that means that, it could be repealed at any time as well. It's held on because people in Idaho really like the rule. It kind of has this broad consensus support. And as well as Senator Risch, I know he's done some work kind of stepping in to keep the Forest Service away from the Idaho rule. So let's talk a little bit about the national rule, because I think there's some misunderstandings about what this means. The national rule prohibited new road building on inventoried roadless areas. And it was kind of implemented in the first place because the Forest Service had so many miles of road that they couldn't afford to maintain it all, and they just really needed to stop building it. The Department of Agriculture's kind of case for removing it is that they think it'll improve wildfire management. I think they also believe that it'll help get more logging on national forests, which is probably true. But there's some important constraints to that, and I'll talk about that in a second. On the wildfire side, the National Roadless Rule never banned fuels treatments. It allowed you to do some small diameter cutting to remove like those small trees that people get worried about. It allowed prescribed fire. It allowed for emergency fire suppression. But what it did ban was roads in that area, which, could make access hard, especially in the more remote areas, those inventory roadless areas that are very far from roads. It can be hard to move heavy equipment in and out of there if there's no road to do that. So, the Forest Service says that a lot of these IRAs, the inventory roadless areas, have high or very high wildfire hazard. And part of that probably is related to the roadless rule, but I will say I think the bigger issue is budgets and staff capacity at the Forest Service right now. So, having the people that can go in there and do a successful fuels treatment is probably the bigger limiting factor. So what matters in this for Idaho outfitters? Well, the obvious point is that, fish and elk and rivers and national forests don't stop at the state line. They don't, they don't follow our boundaries, and neither does sediment in the river. So all of the areas around Idaho will lose this protection most likely, which means we probably will see some more road construction in those areas. So if you're operating in a national forest that's, on the border with Montana, Oregon, Washington, Wyoming, so I think of like the Caribou National Forest, the Cache National Forest in East Idaho, Kootenai, Selkirk's, areas up north, and then stuff around Hell's Canyon on the west side of the state. Kind of what comes to mind. Bitterroot Crest, if you're a land-based outfitter around the Bitterroots, this is going to affect you most likely. That being said, nothing happens automatically. So the roadless rule was a blanket rule, but any new road construction will still have to go through a forest plan as well as like a site-specific authorization. So, this is the top level rescission, but then there's other layers that would have to be navigated to build a new road. The other thing is that, the Forest Service is really the only entity building roads on national forest land. There's some mining companies that do it here and there. The timber companies can't afford to do it. It doesn't make sense for them to build their own roads. So the Forest Service typically subsidizes that road construction. Their road building budget is tiny. It's like $50 million, which, that's less than 100 miles of road in a lot of places. So I think the short-term consequences of this probably small, but in the long term, it is a major shift in the way national forests are managed. And it's something that's really worth paying attention to, especially as new forest plans get implemented and, new projects get proposed. It's something really worth paying attention to. So if folks are out there listening and they are operating in these kind of cross-boundary areas, or they just care about kind of the roadless rule one way or another, the comments, like I said, will be up until September 21st. It's always worth putting in your opinion whether you support or oppose this move. But really what's valuable is having that like operator level specific detail. That's the thing that actually kind of goes into the record that the agencies will pay attention to. Otherwise, it's just they're marking pros and cons. So if you have something specific that you want to add, highly recommend getting in there. I think we're going to make some comments from IOGA's perspective, and we'll try and share those out as we move forward with that. So.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. I think as I've thought about this and read your update that we'll send out to everybody and is definitely worth reading, my big takeaways are, one, here in Idaho, we have our own version of the rule that is being honored in this. And so nothing really meaningfully changes here in Idaho. Same thing for folks in Colorado, if we have some weird person in Colorado that listens to this podcast. Second, that it doesn't it doesn't all of a sudden start creating roads. Like that is, they still, everything on the local ground still has to go through all the normal processes. It opens up to start and have those conversations, but it doesn't guarantee they're ever going to happen. Third big one was Jack's point. This is a budget constrained agency. So going in and building roads is not all of a sudden there's going to be a dearth of new roads because the money isn't there to support that effort. And then I think to Jack's point, one that the one that really sticks to me is the arguments about this being something to do with, preventing big forest fires or doing forest work. Well, we have evidence to support that the more roads you have, the more fires you have. Like access equals fire. So it's kind of a backwards argument to, say that we need to build roads to get in here to prevent forest fires when the data shows that it really has the opposite effect. But anyway, all that to say, this is a big deal. It's just a little bit less of a big deal specifically here in Idaho, but we will be commenting on it. You should be commenting on it. It's worth paying attention to. It also isn't the end of the world. Like the world's not going to fall apart immediately because of this, as far as like public land and everything else. So,
yeah. And something I will add, I think one of the complaints with the roadless rule from managers and other users of the national forest is that they felt like the national roadless rule was too restrictive, and that it was kind of this one size fits all to forest management. And I think I sympathize with that complaint, at least in theory, if not in practice. Something that I hope folks will think about more going forward, especially if this is successfully rescinded, is that the Idaho roadless rule could be a model for a more flexible roadless, like a national roadless rule. I think the Idaho model has borne out as something that's successful in, managing all these competing values on national forest land, and, maybe is a better tool than a blanket, I think the blanket rule that we had before. So just something to be thinking about. And I highly encourage everyone to go do some reading into the Idaho rule, because it is a really interesting piece of conservation.
Yeah, I actually think that would be a potential, if you're trying to look at this through the lens of could there be something positive that comes out of it, if lots of states started following the Idaho example, or that became an example for a national version, I think that actually could be a reasonable outcome here. Not sure if that will happen, but it would be a possible positive. While we're on the subject of the Forest Service is working to streamline authority around fire. So Forest Service Chief Tom Schultz delivered a formal delegation of authority letter consolidating all fire and aviation authority under the agency's Deputy Chief of Fire, Aviation Management Safety, and Employee Wellbeing. What a title.
I know.
Position currently held by Sarah Fisher. I mean, like they could have just said the person who oversees all the things. Would be an interesting
Can I get a title like that?
Right? The deputy chief will oversee all wildfire response planning and aviation operations for the agency, approve emergency spending, align resources, manage communications, act as the kind of lead decision maker on what goes where and emergency delegations, and then delegate these, authorities as needed. I think the argument for doing this is around efficiency. Centralizing command, the Forest Service argues, will reduce bureaucratic layers, get resources to fires faster, have somebody higher up the chain that's deciding what needs to be where with a little bit more information, sort of instead of a regional perspective, having a national perspective, move away from just sort of these fragmented regional siloed management concepts. Reality check to that. Is this just administrative shuffling, everything else? Does coordination actually solve some of the fundamental issues with fire management and structure command? Will it improve interagency communications? Does it, automatically, will this result in better radio comms between Forest Service and BLM crews that are working near each other? It's tough to say. There is a risk that this pushes decision-making further away from the local forests and rangers and people who actually understand the landscape, the fuels, the communities, the impacts. As someone who's been to these fire meetings and had to tell some of these guys, like, you deciding to close this road, which you just look at on a map as a road, is a lifeline to my business. That local knowledge is really important. And, I think there is a fear anytime you move decision-making up the ladder to somebody that's closer to currently DC and potentially Salt Lake later, that you move away from the people who actually understand what the ground impacts are. TBD, right? Like, this consolidation on paper sounds like it would make sense, sounds like it would create efficiency, sounds like it would create a better perspective on where resources are actually needed. But time will tell, because sometimes those consolidations are things that make it sound like they're efficient. We've understood, especially when it gets to government, don't always play out that way. Sometimes they just move things further away from where they need to be. But, it's happening. So I guess at this point, our best action is to try and give feedback where feedback's appropriate on the things we think that it's doing better and the things that we think it's making worse. So underneath, this is all coming from Executive Order 14308. The Trump administration, began the process to consolidating wildland fire agencies with the intent of making federal wildland fire response more efficient. We've talked about this a ton, moving fire under the new organization, National Firefighting? Honestly, I don't even remember. I think I blocked it out, but it's going to be under Department of Interior. And it's interesting, if this is maybe an effort from Forest Service leadership to prove efficiency and consolidation. Improve efficiency and consolidation to demonstrate that the Forest Service is really good at firefighting and maybe should stay underneath them. So it's possible that's what's actually going on here, is trying to create an argument that they shouldn't lose management fire over to the Department of Interior. But time will tell. It's an interesting change, and hopefully, for all of our sakes, it's something that does make the system better.
So I'm going to go ahead and touch on a couple of other little programs we run here at the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association, because we really rely on the support of our members to make sure that we are able to do the advocacy work that makes this industry grind year in, year out. And thanks to our Dollars for Outdoor supporters who have gone above and beyond. It's Cascade Raft and Kayak, Mile High Outfitters, McGowan Outfitters, White Cloud Outfitters, Bear Valley, Rapid River Outfitters, Soar Northwest, Bighorn Outfitting, Mystic Saddle, Flying Bee Ranch, and Table Mountain Outfitters, all some of our big contributors this year. And another program that we're having going is the Dollars for Salmon program, which is specifically geared more towards salmon and steelhead recovery. And Rapid River Outfitters, SNS Outfitters, Canyons, and Solitude River trips, and Salmon River Drifters were our biggest donors to Dollars for Salmon this year. We'd love to have more of our fish advocates join us for the Dollars for Salmon program.
Yeah, next up, folks may have seen this in the Lewiston Tribune from our friend Erik Barker, but we're getting some numbers in about the fall Chinook run and A-run steelhead coming back. So as of last Thursday, we've seen a little over 28,500 steelhead passing through Bonneville Dam since July 1st. The 10-year average for that time period is just over 50,000. So that's about 57% of average. And that average is already, comparatively, historically pretty terrible. So yeah, not a good look for steelhead so far. Wild steelhead are running at about half their 10-year average, so they're even a little bit lower than the broad steelhead numbers. Up on the Snake River Basin at Lower Granite Dam, fish counts are about 1,256 fish this year. The average there is 1,931. So again, that average number is already depressed compared to historical counts, but we're below average again. Chris Sullivan, who's the anadromous fish quarter for IDFG, told the Lewiston Tribune that this is the second lowest cumulative counts at Bonneville Dam going back for 20 years. So the only year worse than that was 2021. A couple things, just caveats before people panic. First, it's early. So the B-run fish are still coming up the river. They're just starting to show up at Bonneville. And that run tends to build into early September. Second, there's kind of some weird compositional effects in the run this year. So apparently a lot of the early returners have been two salt fish instead of, a single year in the ocean fish. Which is just kind of a weird pattern. So that could be changing what these early counts are showing. On the other hand, fall Chinook are doing okay. The fall Chinook are running ahead of their 10-year average at both Bonneville and Lower Granite. So we're expecting about 21,000 hatchery fall Chinook back to the Snake River. But wild fish counts are pretty low, so only about 5,000 wild fish. And that below average wild return is why Idaho and Washington have cut their wild fall Chinook harvest. So this year, the bag limit will be 3 fish per day, 3 fall Chinook per day, but only one of them can be wild. And then for coho, the Nez Perce tribe is forecasting about 8,200 coho back to the Snake River Basin, which is kind of on target. Yeah. And, we're kind of seeing the effects of the depressed steelhead runs across the basin. Oregon just closed steelhead fishing on the Deschutes to protect some of the wild steelhead there. Managers on the Deschutes think that the steelhead there are headed for top 5 lowest returns since 1976. So in 50 years, it's going to be in the top 5 lowest. A couple things to watch out for. Fishing game will continue to adjust these steelhead counts and their regulations kind of as the run comes in. And then hopefully the Clearwater B run will come in strong because, I think for a lot of folks, that's what they're really counting on. And that could be kind of a second wave that bolsters our numbers. On the ocean side of things, something we've been watching is this El Nino cycle, which is creating a big marine heat wave in the Pacific. And that could kind of cause anadromous fish counts to drop over the next few years. At least more than they already have. So this is something we'll keep tracking. Obviously, Fish and Game is putting out a lot of information about this, probably communicating with outfitters pretty directly, but we'll try and keep you updated on our side of things as that B run picture clears up.
Yeah. Not a lot of great signs, but hopefully, fingers crossed, right? Fingers, toes, prayers, fish dances, all the things. So, yep. Thanks for that update, Jack. All right. So, I don't know if better news is even close to the right words to use on this one. In other news. Yeah. The Idaho Land Board met recently to get an update on the fire season. and just some numbers that we thought were worth sharing. So nearly 700,000 acres have burned across Idaho so far this year. Lands Director Dustin Miller told the board that outlook shows above average fire potential statewide through August and September, with conditions continuing to dry out. Nationally, more than 7.2 million acres have burned, which is above the 10-year average for this state. The cost, which is, I think, where it's worth really talking about from the state of Idaho, the state has spent an estimated $31 million on firefighting and expects about $10.9 million back in reimbursements. The Department of Lands has roughly $25 million left in its suppression fund, though Miller said it's unclear where that will stand at the end of the season. A lot of what state crews have been doing is assisting federal agencies, and it takes time to determine what the states share and what will get reimbursed. Some context on that fund: it hit $0 in June. The legislator had approved a one-time transfer of $32.8 million, which went through at the start of the fiscal year. So, not great as far as the amount of money they have and the amount of money they may need. Miller said the volume of fire activity across the Pacific Northwest has strained resources. When rangeland fires were burning in southern Idaho, the Department of Interior had a hard time getting allocating resources because their focus was just simply on other areas like around Spokane and communities that were threatened. Governor Little's activation of the Idaho National Guard helped fill that gap, particularly on the big grass fire in Owyhee County, where Guard helicopters and crews came in at one point when resource orders were unable to be filled. So the big grass fire burned nearly 580,000 acres and was relatively contained when we started reading on this. This is relevant because, everything that's happening in fire, consolidation, reorganization, everything else. So as we just talked about, allocation of resources and how that's being managed. But I think the big takeaway is when there's lots of fires, it makes it harder to get resources to all of them, which means that, what could have been a small fire, if there was more resources available, can become a bigger fire if they can't get to it quickly. Department of Lands is preparing a fiscal year 2028 request of about $10 million, most of it fire related. And we'll see what happens there. I think it's important to remember back to the last session where budgets were tight and budget writers cut nearly every state agency to address a projected fiscal shortfall with the state budget. And some firefighting costs were funded below requests or on a one-time basis. So in a state where we don't seem to have a whole lot of extra money floating around, growing fire budgets is something we should all be keeping an eye on.
Erik, just something on that real quick. I just saw an article the other day that I think the state is actually going to come in above their revenue targets, and have a little extra money than they thought they did. So maybe we could see some of that invested in fire staffing at the state level. Something that we've kind of heard some complaints about recently is that, during a heavy fire season, a lot of IDL's internal staff actually end up going out on fires because a lot of them are red card holders. And, sometimes you just really need that capacity. You need people out there. And if you don't have anyone else to send, you got to send the permit administrator, right? It's good that folks can get out there and there's this flexible capacity, but it really slows down a million of the other things that IDL is supposed to be doing. So I think I'd speak for a lot of people in saying that it would be great to have more kind of wildland fire capacity, and that wouldn't take away from the other functions of the agency.
Yeah, I think that's right. All right, so getting towards the end of the updates here, but one of the last ones is the Oregon State Marine Board has proposed a rule to require Oregon guide licensing for anyone who operates in Hell's Canyon or right on the Oregon-Idaho border. Right now, the law, I think, is in Oregon is a little fuzzy on whether or not you actually need an Oregon guide license to operate in Hell's Canyon, even though you're launching on the Oregon side. And so they're just working on cleaning that language up to say that you do. Most folks I've talked to on the rafting side already do have Oregon Marine Board licenses, and so probably not that big of a deal. One thing that is kind of a big deal for some folks is that required fishing license, individual guide license for anyone who has a boat that has someone fishing on it or is doing anything related to fishing. So your raft guide who has a kid fishing for bass off the front of it, technically that guide needs their own independent Oregon State Marine Board guide license, which is $350 per license. So it's not nothing. We talked to the Oregon State Marine Board literally this morning about this, and what they told us is that the intention is, and the understanding is that someone who's floating in the river, there's reciprocity between the states. So if your guide has an Idaho guide license, that meets the requirements for in that space. That when Oregon or Oregon State Police would be enforcing this requirement for an independent guide license through the state of Oregon for something related to fishing is going to be when you are attached to the shore on the Oregon side. So if you're floating in the middle of the river, according to what the Marine Board told us about an hour ago, you shouldn't need that independent Oregon guide license. Your Idaho guide license will suffice as long as you are licensed for whatever activity you happen to be doing. But we'll keep you updated as that goes forward. They are accepting public comment, I believe, on this through the end of September. They don't see it as a big deal other than just sort of clarifying what is really going on. That if you're touching the Oregon side or you're camping on the Oregon side or you're launching from the Oregon side, you do need to have, your business does need to have a valid Oregon State Marine Board guide license. So another fun one.
Gotta love licensing board stuff.
Yeah, no, it's really a good time. All right. Well, that takes us to the interview for today, which is one I'm really excited to share with everybody. I was lucky enough to sit down a couple days ago with Mark Deming, the Chief Marketing Officer for NRS. NRS, as anybody really knows, is Idaho-based. They're one of the premier leading manufacturers in sort of the river water gear space. Internationally known, their gear is everywhere you go. Based out of Moscow. And so it was really fun for me to sit down with Mark and just kind of chat about the history of NRS, where they came from, how their brand has developed over time, going from being mail order catalog out of little old Moscow to kind of being what they are today, while staying true to their roots and who they are and why in reality they're still kind of a small company that acts like a small company but has a big reach. It was a lot of fun. I remember growing up as a kid, NRS was the great river company out there. They had all the gear you'd buy was NRS. It was the best stuff. And it was sort of like a pilgrimage when I started guiding in Idaho to go up to the old factory off the highway and buy some gear and get a tour and see the place. And it was just like this thing you had to do. So for me personally, it was a lot of fun to get to talk with Mark. And I think it's a really interesting conversation that I hope everybody enjoys. All right. Well, I guess, yeah. Hardy, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Excited to have you on more, and we'll talk about the annual meeting more and all the other things. Hardy, what other events do we have coming up after the annual meeting?
Great events coming up later on this year. Once we get into 2027, we're going to have our annual lobby day at the Basque Center again this year. It is going to be on February 4th with our prep day on February 3rd. We'd love to have as many volunteers that are willing to come help with these events as possible. It's a ton of fun. You get to cook a wild game feast for all the legislators, and it is a fun time to meet those guides that you don't get to see all winter long. But the very following day, we are actually going to have our big thaw annual fundraiser over at BSU. So you will be able to come down to Boise in one trip, not have to make multiple trips this winter, and be able to come to the big lobby day and join us for our big thaw auction the next day and do it all in one trip and not have to come make that drive twice. So please come visit us. It's going to be a ton of fun. We're going to have those classic events, and we're looking for as many volunteers as are willing to help.
Sounds like a busy week, Hardy. Are you going to have any hair left after that?
Maybe not. Putting two events in 2 days after each other will be a push. So all the volunteer help I can get, I'll appreciate. And but they're going to be great events, and we're going to put them on better than ever.
Yeah, I kind of love to joke that we obviously did something to piss off the board because they decided to put two of our three biggest events of the year within 48 hours. But I do think it's actually going to be awesome. I think you'll be able to come down and support both events, which are two of my favorite days of the year anyway. And so backing into each other will be awesome. But the hope is we get lots of volunteers because, as Jack said, we want to help keep Hardy sane. So everybody needs to come down, volunteer their time, support, and help us have two really fun days of one, advocating for the industry and outfitting and guiding at the legislature. And then a second day is just going to be a party to celebrate the industry. So get those on your calendar. February 4th and 5th are days you need to come down to Boise and just be ready to hang out with all of your best friends in the industry. Spend one day cooking and one day eating. Should be great. Awesome. Well, here is the interview with Mark from NRS. Hey, Mark, thanks so much for joining us here on the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association podcast. We're excited to have you.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So Mark, you're with NRS. Give us a little bit of kind of your background and what you do over there at NRS and how you got there and everything else.
Yeah, sure. So I like to say that NRS is a 3-month job that I've had for 16 years now. Like a lot of folks at this company, I kind of eddied out here and never left, but grew up in this part of the country, Montana, Eastern Washington, Northern Idaho, and it just kind of been outdoors obsessed from a very early age, and kind of have done just about everything you can do outdoors. I don't do things with horses. I'm scared of them. And I don't sail. The one time I did, I capsized and lost everything. Got a bit of a gear problem, as you can imagine. So it's really fortunate that I landed in the outdoor industry and I get access to a lot of that stuff. But yeah, I went to college at the University of Idaho here in Moscow. Have a degree in creative writing and did what a lot of English majors do. I worked as a wildland firefighter and a carpenter and a freelance journalist and a musician, and had a pretty loose resume to say the least. In about 2010, I decided to move back to Moscow, and go to law school here to study environmental law at University of Idaho, and had a young family at the time and needed a job to pay the bills for a few months, and I took a $10 an hour customer service job at NRS. My wife thought I was crazy to apply for an entry level job like that, but I was like, I don't know, this company seems really cool and you just never know where things will go. Had a writing background, of course, which led me pretty quickly to the marketing department here, and didn't take me very long to realize that I'd rather work at NRS than be a lawyer.
So did you finish law school or
Never went.
never went?
Never went.
Yeah, I've dropped out of a master's program the day before I was supposed to start, and then I dropped out of another one 2 classes from the end. So I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of funny where the humanities degrees will lead you over time. So
Yeah. Well, it's it worked out well at NRS in that way. It's NRS is kind of made up of a lot of folks like me who are misfits and dropouts and people who found a home here and carved out a career. We've got a lot of former raft guides, firefighters, carpenters, bartenders, cooks, a lot of rugby players for some reason.
interesting.
Yeah, there was kind of a feeder from the U of I rugby team to NRS for a while, yeah, just being an employee-owned company, and I think there's a real sense of shared purpose and belonging here that I haven't seen anywhere else, and I think people find a home here and they tend to stay for a very long time.
That's awesome. So what is your role now? You've moved from the $10 an hour support person to what do you do now for NRS?
Yeah, I'm the chief marketing officer now, and have just kind of worked my way up over the years. Yeah, like I said, started out answering phones and emails here, and had that writing background. And our marketing director, David, at the time, David Blue, who's now our chief operating officer, he's like, "Oh, you can write, huh?" He's like, "What would you want to help out with this advertisement we need to make?" I was like, "Sure." And I wrote some copy for that. And pretty soon I was writing web copy for the products and things like that. That was about the time that the social media boom and the internet boom was taking off. And David was like, "I feel like we should be on Facebook. And would you want to take that over?" I was like, "Sure, I'll do that." And he's like, and we're kind of like, well, if we're going to be on Facebook, we got to have something to put on there. So we decided to start a blog, and it just kind of steamrolled from there, or snowballed from there. And pretty soon I was managing the athlete program, and I was managing the blog and the social media and writing the copy and all those things. And as the company grew, my role expanded, and here I find myself 16 years later doing what I do now.
Yeah. That's funny. It makes me feel a little better. I know with our company, my background in being a rafting outfitter, it was like, oh, Facebook, we should probably be on Facebook. Oh, people are blogging, we should probably blog. And then, it was like we should do this, and then we'd figure out why we were doing it after we got started.
Yeah.
Kind of seemed like the way it went.
Yeah, there was a little bit of that for sure.
Being a kid who grew up in Southern Oregon and kayaking, and it was a big part of my life, and river running, and then coming to Idaho to guide, like I remember thinking that coming up to NRS, like the old warehouse was down there on the highway, like that was like a pilgrimage, it was sort of this like thing that you had to do, our kind of version of going to Mecca to where the gear came from. It was always something that was really impactful to me. And looking back at NRS, this company that was started with a couple $1,000s and a typewriter back in like 1972, what does it feel, as a CMO, like to kind of own that kind of origin story, and how does that play into who you are today and how you talk about the company?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that origin story is just absolutely priceless. You just cannot manufacture authenticity. It has to be baked in, right? And NRS has that in spades, has always had that in spades. And I guess when I started, we weren't really telling that story. We just kind of took it for granted that folks like you knew that story, and that was the end of it. And I remember going to David Blue, who was then our marketing director, and just saying, like, dude, we're sitting on a golden egg. Like, nobody else has a story like this. This company has so much soul. And we were just selling products at the time, right? It was just like print a catalog, stuff as many products as you can fit on one page into it. And that was it. There wasn't brand marketing at NRS. And in fact, our founder was like, I don't get why you would do this. But David and I saw the potential of the company and the brand. We thought there was just like a lot of untapped, unrealized potential there, and really kind of embarked on a 10+ year journey to build a brand around that story, and eventually transform NRS from being a mail order retailer and distributor to a leading outdoor brand, the brand that you see in the world today. David took over the product side of the business, has done an amazing job elevating the quality and sophistication of NRS gear. If you've been around for as long as you have, you remember, back in the day, like we used to say, our kind of unique value proposition at that time was what we would call affordable utility. It's like, okay, there's the Kogatat, and then there's the NRS, which is durable, gets the job done, a little less money. And same with life jackets, same with a lot of things, right? And we, really wanted to. That's a point of pride, really, just to like elevate that product experience from that like affordable utility to what we would call ultimate utility. Now it's like we want to build stuff that's on par with the best gear that you can buy for climbing or skiing or whatever, mountain biking or whatever outdoor activity you're into. And so that's been, a long journey, and we've come so far. It's really incredible what David's done there. And then I got to kind of manage the brand marketing side of it, and work with a bunch of really talented people to tell that story in really creative ways, and to embody, trying to embody those company values that Bill instilled in NRS from day one, and in the ways that we engage in the community, and really just living out that brand. I don't love the phrase tell the brand story. I prefer to think of it as like living out our values in the spaces that we're in. And phrase that I use a lot is the how is the why at NRS, like how we conduct ourselves, how we do business. That's why I work here. That's why most of my colleagues work here. That's why we've been around for 54 years. We do things a different way, but it works for us, and that's why we're here.
I feel like over the years, kind of to your point, you've seen NRS, both like the exact kinds of gear you guys are manufacturing and the quality of it, evolve a little bit and kind of come and go. How has sort of everything you just talked about and that brand, sort of recognizing and developing your own brand identity, how has that influenced the other side of the house? Where as they've thought about what products to design, what markets to really get into, stepping into sups and more of the rec space and all of those things. Like how would you say that has influenced where you guys have decided to put your efforts and focus on a product development side?
Yeah, well, I think the two go part and parcel, right? They have to work together, hand in hand, in order for the product or the brand to be successful. If those things are, if you have a house divided, it's not going to stand very well in this, in any industry, but probably especially the outdoor industry. People want to, they want to buy, do business with, buy products from a brand that they care about, and a brand that builds products that they trust. And those two things are, they really go hand in hand. And so it has been like a really good professional marriage between me and David, because he was my boss in the marketing department originally, and then he kind of handed that over to me and went over the product side. But we're in constant communication on this stuff. But it's interesting how the product assortment that we have evolved over time, and if you look at NRS's product assortment, it's insane. Like, it's truly outrageous. Nobody makes as wide of a breadth of outdoor products as we make, and it's partly because our industry isn't the paddle sports industry, the river industry, like, isn't that big, right? So it's like, so you don't grow, you grow by developing more products and more solutions for people, versus just like reaching more and more people. There are just only so many people we can reach. But the way that products originally began being developed for NRS was just on a as needed basis, essentially. So Bill started the company in 1972. By the mid 70s, he was like running out of dry bags that he could bring in to offer to his customers. The old dry bags in those days were these military surplus delousing bags. It's like a big rubber bag that, if you got lice in the army, you'd put all your clothes and bedding in this thing with a bunch of poison and shake it up to kill the lice. But it turned out that those were pretty good waterproof bags for boaters. But they ran out of that kind of World War II surplus of those delousing bags, and Bill had to find another solution. So that's where the Bill's bag came from. He bought some surplus truck tarp material that he got a good deal on. He found a person in Seattle who could weld that material and would go over there on his weekends. He was still teaching at the University of Idaho at the time. He'd go over there on his weekends, sleep on this guy's couch, and prototype Bill's bags. And that's the first NRS product. Right about the same time as when the NRS strap came out, and that was another one of these kind of necessity-driven products that, there was a high water year on the Middle Fork, and there were some fatalities, and some things Bill saw that he said, I think that some of these incidents would not have been as bad if people had been able to get their gear off of the boat easier. And he got this idea, to adapt like the cam strap from the freight industry for rafters. And he, found a buckle. I think the buckle was from Germany. The webbing was from Spain. He brought the two together and created the NRS strap. And it's like, where would rafting be today without these straps, right? You've never seen a raft on the water. Yeah. And it just kind of took off from there. It was like outfitters needed, wetsuits to provide to their customers. And like the ones you could get from Surf or Dive weren't quite cutting it. And Bill created the Farmer Bill. Okay, he needed to get a little bit more creative with his names, I think, but it wasn't. At least he didn't call it the Bill strap. And so like NRS would just kind of like when there was a hole in its assortment or customers needed something that they couldn't source somewhere else, he would figure out how to make it. And that's how NRS product development started. And we kind of keep that tradition alive today. Like you mentioned, stand-up paddling. And I remember when stand-up paddling kind of was first starting, and we were like watching videos of people doing this and thinking like, is that the dumbest thing ever? Or is it kind of cool? Is this like rollerblading, or is this, is this just going to be some fad, and we're going to laugh about it later? But we were already building boats out of the material, the drop stitch material. We were building a boat called the Gig Bob, which is a personal fishing watercraft. Like we could build a stand-up paddleboard out of that, and we just kind of for fun started prototyping them. And we were one of the first, if not the first, to bring out an inflatable stand-up paddleboard. And then that took off, and customers wanted it, and we were able to build it and provide that. So that's what we did. It does present challenges as a marketer, kind of work in these different markets. I remember with stand-up paddling, we're like, how do we market these things, right? Like a lot of that culture was very coastal. It was like women in bikinis, and people were racing them, and we're like, that's like, we can't do that. Like that is not authentic to who we are. And so we kind of eventually were like, let's just be who we are. We're a company from Idaho. We come from the rivers. Like we're not going to try to be a surf company. We're just going to be who we are, and build these, paddleboards kind of the way we build rafts. We're going to build them with like really high quality materials and in the best way we know how, and build them to last and hold up and perform well. And we carved out a nice little business building stand-up paddleboards. So I would like to say that everything was planned ahead and orchestrated and all that, but we're a pretty small company, relatively speaking, and we do a lot of things kind of on the fly. That's a good example of one where we're just like, oh, maybe this will be a thing, and we tried it out, and away it went. So
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think I bought probably 5 or 6 of that first generation or maybe second generation of those things, and we tried doing guided trips, like whitewater class 1, 2 trips on the Rogue or something.
Oh, brutal.
Yeah,
those first, it was called the Big Earl.
They were like, yeah, if I have to do that again, I'm out. Like,
yeah, the early boards were pretty rough. They've come a long way.
Yeah, there's some learning that happened in those generations for sure. I got a couple of the new ones, and they're a lot of fun. What do you think about, like, even in paddle sports, and you guys came from mail order, right? And so that was really primary business. But what is the biggest structural shift you think you've seen in paddle sports and how they're bought and sold in, say, like the last 20 years? I mean, obviously the internet, but do you even think about how you brand your company, like what you're actually trying to sell versus, is it like it was products? Is it now something else? Like the products are sort of secondary to the bigger story of who you are, or what these mean for somebody, or what, I guess, what's the big trends that you've seen in that space?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but I'll kind of take a step back and just talk about that transition from the catalog to the internet. When I started in 2010, we still were shipping 5 or 6 catalogs a year. Each catalog had a mail order form in the middle of it. And one of my first jobs was processing these mail orders. So, the mail order form included in a self-addressed stamped envelope. You would, receive this thing and have the, form inside with the products that people wanted and the quantity and the colors and the sizes, and either a check or a bunch of cash, and oftentimes, quarters and nickels and dimes. And that's how we did it. And I remember,
that's crazy to think about now. Like,
yeah. And I really remember the conversation where we're like, hey, what do you think about not including the mail order form in the catalog from now on? And it was like kind of a big deal, right? It's like, we're going to really piss some people off if we take the mail order form out of the catalog, but we did it. We also, reduce the number of catalogs that we were sending from 5 or 6 down to 1 or 2, and that that cleared up a lot of budget for me to work with in the digital space, and that's when we, really started investing in high quality digital content, like the Duct Tape Diaries blog and our first film series, the Souls in Water series that we did with Skip Armstrong and Anson Fogel, which was pretty groundbreaking, and it still holds up today. Really incredible work, and it was a fun time because this was all so new and we were just figuring it out as we went along, and yeah, it's changing from that like product marketing model where again we were just like, see how many products you can fit on the page of one catalog and sell it off the page, to marketing a brand, primarily. Yes, we still promote individual products and we have to educate folks about those products and all those things. We do that work. It's important. But the biggest idea is like we want to create lifelong relationships with our customers, to where if they're going on the water, they need gear, the first thing they do is go to NRS.com or go into their local paddle sports shop and look for NRS, because they know us, they trust us, we've built that relationship, we've taken care of them in the past, and so that's really where it all starts. That's the foundation of everything, and yeah, I mean, mediums change over time, technology changes, we're always having to adapt to that. But Bill liked to say that there are two types of people in business. There are foxes and there are hedgehogs. Foxes, the fox knows many things and the hedgehog knows one big thing. And NRS knows one big thing. And that's creating loyal customers, building those relationships over time, person to person. And like, again, like the technology has changed a lot, but like the approach really hasn't. When I first started, on the phones, Bill was so obsessed with, his mantra was, treat the customer the way you would want to be treated. And that kind of grew to like, treat your coworker the way you want to be treated, treat people the way you want to be treated. But there was, if anyone was on hold for more than like 10 seconds, an alarm would go off in the building. And it was like, drop everything, somebody's on hold. It was an emergency. And like that philosophy, we're in a new building, we have a new phone system, we don't have an alarm that blares through the building anymore, but that philosophy hasn't changed. Everything is just really focused on those personal connections, person to person, on the phone, on email, or if we're in the digital space, really providing that kind of, we're not chasing clickbait. We're not trying to get the most, viral TikTok video or whatever, right? We're just trying to provide substance for our people, and that continues to build that relationship and that personal connection over time with our company.
That's awesome. Have you guys over time seen a change in kind of who your customer is? Because it feels like, in the early days, selling to pretty core, like people, like they were river people, and maybe there's a lot of outfitters, right? Like that sort of seemed like the foundation was people for whom river running was life a little bit.
Yeah.
And over time, has that market really shifted? How much? Where's kind of your core focus now? Is it more the recreationalist? Is it still kind of everybody? Like, how do you balance that out? Because I would assume, especially as you move to some of the products you've moved towards, there definitely is a broader community there than there used to be.
Yeah, it's broader and it's different, right? I'm of a generation that like, we were, I guess what we would now call core outdoors people. We were trying to go out every weekend, every week if we could in the summer, and buying a lot of gear and just really dedicated to it. It was like our whole personal identity, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of that early NRS customer was that type of person. And those people are still around and they're still our core customer. But, I think especially since COVID, like the makeup of the entire outdoor participant base has really changed. It's gotten a lot bigger, which is great. But it's gotten bigger in different ways. It's not, not all those folks that came in 2020 to 2022 are, maybe they don't just fully identify as like, I'm an outdoors person and that's what I'm all about. It's folks that, go hiking, a few times a year, or go car camping a few times a year, or get on an outfitted trip for the day on the Brigham stretch, or whatever it is, right? But I think what we've been trying to unlock, and what, kind of the whole outdoor industry has been trying to unlock, is like, how do you take that person, welcome them into our community, into our sports, help them learn and grow with it, and hopefully one day become somebody who's a very avid participant. And it's a challenge, but it's also a really exciting challenge. We've just seen a huge growth in the diversity of the outdoor participant base, whether that's age, geography, ethnicity, whatever it may be. And that's really encouraging. And I think the future is bright if we can, continue to connect with these folks and make them feel welcome here, not intimidated, and make sure that, they're able to, find the resources they need to, learn the skills, learn about the gear, be safe, and enjoy it. So hopefully they'll grow with it. And so, yeah, it takes a bit of a shift in the mindset for sure. I think 15 years ago was like, all the outdoor media was like, people hucking themselves off of cliffs on skis and running waterfalls and kayaks and all these things. And, that's a pretty small niche group of people now who identify as that kind of outdoors person. And so we need to be mindful of that. And I think the trick is being mindful of that, being welcoming to this new cohort, but also staying true to who we are and what we're about. And I think in, the river world, in the paddle sports industry, I think we have a very romantic, kind of attractive story to tell, right? Like, you're with Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association, is there anything like cooler than a multi-day trip on the Middle Fork of the Salmon, right? And I think tapping into that, aspirational aspect of it, like making sure people say like, oh, like river culture, I didn't know this was a thing, but like, wow, that's cool. Like, I want to be that, and we're seeing, an influx of lots of different folks from different backgrounds who are entering guide schools now and becoming river guides. And I just think that's so exciting. And I think that, collectively, as an industry, if we do a good job of telling that story of the magic of the river and that lifestyle and the romance of it and the beauty of the landscape and that experience of being, unplugged and on the water, I think we've got a bright future ahead of us, but it's going to, it takes work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I get kind of what you're saying. It used to be that the advertisements were really like, it was all about, watching Class 5 athletes. Like, it was aspirational because the target was someone like me who was 18 and wanted to go run Class 5 stuff. And so it's all photos of people who are doing rad stuff and, your gear.
Yeah.
And it feels like that has changed, right? It's now stories of people, running their first Class 3 rapid or something like that, where it's a broader market that doesn't have the same goals in the long run.
Right. And, and it's stories of, indigenous youth, being the first to do the full descent of the undammed Klamath, right?
That was
like,
rad. Yeah.
That's the kind of stories that just do it for me right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting piece. So from an NRS perspective, as you're thinking about telling stories and framing, your brand and everything else, what are the the directions that you're focused on as far as kind of those communities and the stories that you're finding interesting and want to associate with NRS?
I think right now, I think a lot of my job is sort of having my ear to the railroad track and trying to like anticipate the vibes, and what's going to resonate with people, and what's going to be meaningful to people. I think right now the outdoors is serving as an antidote to this like incredibly rapid changing technological landscape that's intimidating to a lot of folks, and confusing, right? I think human to human connections become more and more important as the digital realms become less and less human. I think that's, we're kind of going backwards to go forward a little bit. I think we want to really focus on people right now. We're a people-driven company. The success of NRS has always relied on the people that work here and the connections that we make with the people that we do business with and the communities that we show up in. And we want to, continue to translate that that ethos into what we're doing in all of our marketing, and so the stories that we want to tell, the engagements that we want to create are really focused around real people and their real skills. I think the guiding community is really central to this concept. We joke that guiding is the ultimate future-proof job. There's there's no replacement for the human experience, the skill gained, the calluses and the sweat and blood of being a river guide day in and day out. There's no replacement for that, and that's, I think, as the world continues to move in the direction that it's moving, like that, the novelty and the grace and beauty of that role of those folks in the world is going to become just more and more unique and special. And that's what we want to lean into. We want to tell those kinds of stories, and then we want to embody that same kind of concept in how we do business. Come to us because when you call NRS, the owner answers the phone. It's an employee-owned company, and they'll talk to you for an hour and a half about how you want to set up your raft. And we're doubling down on people. That's what we're doing.
That's awesome. That makes a lot of sense to me. I know we saw that in our company, and I feel like I see that in the industry. This is sort of the backlash to screen time in a lot of ways. And, the isolation that comes with all the screen time. Like, there's something that's becoming really sexy about sitting around a campfire with people. Like,
yeah,
it's aspirational now to go and do that somewhere that your phone doesn't work,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I have, it's a small sample size, but I have, kids now who are ages 18 to 21. But, they and their friends are like, to heck with this stuff. And they're kind of going back. Like, my youngest just like got rid of his smartphone and got a flip phone. And like, he and his friends are going to punk shows, and they're on the river right now, and they're really focused on doing real things in the real world. And I think that's the new rebellion in a weird way.
I love that.
And I'm stoked to be a part of that.
Yeah, no, this whole like Luddite movement, I'm into it. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thinking about, take a little bit of a shift here. What, in your product categories and sort of what you're seeing in the industry, what is like the hot thing? Where do you think things are going? For a while it was like SUPs seemed to be just exploding, and it was everywhere, and it was all anybody wanted to do was these swim besides. Like, what is kind of the next big thing? What are you guys excited about?
I mean, well, one of the big things for us is
Pack rafts.
in the fly fishing side has been big for us. And I'll get to what I'm most excited about, which is pack rafts. But first, fishing. For us, like NRS has been selling whitewater boats forever and ever, right? And anglers would come to us and want to adapt a whitewater raft to become a fishing raft. And so we would put these convoluted frames in them with platforms that you could stand on and thigh bars and all these things. And just a few years ago, we're like, hey, what if we just designed a boat from the ground up for fishing instead of trying to retrofit one of our other boats? And that's when the NRS Slipstream series came out, and this really took off and resonated with a lot of folks. And so that side, I'm really excited about the fishing watercraft. We've got just an incredible group of engineers and industrial designers that are also obsessed river people and fly anglers. And I mean, the way they nerd out on these products is ridiculous, and the stuff that they're building is insane. So that's really exciting. But yeah, for me personally, and from a personal standpoint as well as a business standpoint, I think pack rafting is on the cusp of kind of a boom like we saw with SUP. Maybe bigger.
I mean, it seems like it's all freaking anybody, everybody's buying pack rafts.
Everybody's buying pack rafts, right? And I kind of liken it to, so I'm also a cyclist, a mountain biker. I was a road biker. I remember, in about 2012, I also raced cyclocross at the time, and we live in a county where like 80% of the roads are gravel, and we're like, what if we just rode our cyclocross bikes on the gravel roads instead of riding the same 3 paved roads over and over again? And it just unleashed this like whole new activity that completely changed our lives, right? And that's all we did for like 8 or 10 years. And like gravel biking just like became this category that didn't exist, and then all of a sudden it just went boom, right? Because what it did is it opened up like a whole new range of adventures for people that hadn't been very accessible before. And I think pack rafts are going to do the same thing. I think that pack raft, the term is a bit of a misnomer. I don't think that the future customer for pack rafting is going to be a lot of like weight weenies who are, backpacking deep into the Frank to, pack raft out. I think it's going to be a lot of people who just see these boats as like a really convenient, not very intimidating way to access the water and to get more creative with the types of runs and trips that we're doing, right? So, I come from a whitewater kayaking background, and so do my buddies. But, this year for the first time, we pretty much paddled pack rafts all spring because it just opens up, like whether it's getting on the water at a lower level. There's a run here outside of Moscow called the Potlatch Canyon, which has like a pretty heinous 2-mile hike out up a steep, muddy logging road, which isn't, it's a class 4 or 5 roadless run, and then you got to hike out. But with a pack raft, man, you just like stuff your bills bag inside the boat, run the river, put everything in your bills bag, and walk out. Game changer, right? And so I think people's like imagination is being sparked by these boats, and they're thinking of all the cool things that they can do with them. I also think that the technology is such, the materials are such that you're going to see the designs of those pack rafts rapidly changing and improving over the years, so that it's like kind of like with mountain bikes for a long time, where it's like the one that you bought 2 years ago is now like, oh man, I really got to get this one now because it's even better. So from a product standpoint, there's just like a lot of runway there to do cool things. And then I think on that recreational side too, right? Like these boats are so lightweight, so convenient, they pack down so small. So imagine you're a person with a young family and you're trying to car camp out of a Subaru, and you got everything jammed into back and in the rocket box, you're camping on a lake and you really want to get out on that water. Well, with a pack raft that takes up hardly any space, you can do that. Van lifers, all those types of folks too. And then, I think, I love a lot of people get excited about, we have a lot of alpine lakes in Idaho, and now you can put a really lightweight pack raft in your backpack, and you can hike up there, and you can jump in it with your fly rod, and you can go out and float on the lake and catch fish. Like there's just so much you can do with them. I think we barely scratch the surface of where these things are going to go.
Yeah,
and I think too,
that makes sense.
and like the inflatable kayak side too, there will probably be some cannibalization of that inflatable kayak market, I would guess. The pack rafts, like, you're able to do things with the designs of those that you're not with the IKs, and I think I'm seeing more and more pack rafts on Idaho rivers where you would have seen inflatable kayaks a few years ago.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, as someone who comes from a hardshell kayak background and then was an IK outfitter for a couple decades, it's been fun watching that evolution and the growth of it, because, for so long, if you were an inflatable kayaker, like in the river world, you were kind of viewed as a dork, by like the hardshell kayaking community. Like, they look down on you, you're like, yeah. Exactly, right? And it's like, yeah, but I could do rad stuff in this. So,
Yeah.
But it's been...
Well, keep your eye out. We've got a new boat coming out next year that I'm super excited about. And I was, as the Clydesdale on the product testing group, I got to be the tester for the large size of it. And coming from a whitewater kayaking background, it's like, oh, this paddles like a 9-foot river runner, and it is a fun boat to run. It's not a raft, it's a kayak. So really exciting stuff coming.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think personally, like, there's a lot of rivers that I would rather be in, like a pack raft or an IK, than a hard boat, because it's actually more fun. And so like I've loved seeing this evolution, because I think it's wonderful to have sort of this variety of crafts for the right, you can grab the right craft for the right activity, and that evolution's been awesome to watch. Speaking of fishing, what happened to the drift boat? The inflatable drift boat. That was cool. I never got to row one. I always wanted to. And I was like, this is kind of cool. Like, the concept, at least, was really fun.
It was a cool concept. It was actually, a really nice boat to row. A lot of people loved those things.
That's what I heard.
We put so much R&D into that boat. I mean, our old frame manufacturing facility before we moved had like several of the prototypes of that frame hanging from the ceiling, and these were just the most crazy convoluted things with the most complex bends, and I mean, it was wild developing that thing. The problem with that boat was it was darn near impossible to repair. And part of our philosophy as a company is like, we really want our stuff to be repairable, so that it stays on the water. It's not ending up in a landfill. Again, like, from a customer loyalty standpoint, I think, building products that last and that people can fix themselves, I think, is super important. And we just found ourselves having to do warranty replace, like, for any kind of pinhole leak or whatever, that in a raft you would just be like, dab some aqua seal on there or put a patch on it, no big deal. In these boats, it was often seemingly simple leaks were impossible to fix, and so we were just like sending out warranty replacements of these hulls. And from an environmental standpoint, from a customer experience standpoint, all of that, it just didn't feel good, and so we just had to kill it. But it hurt to kill it, because it was a really cool, innovative product, and a lot of people really loved it.
Yeah, as someone who guides it, used to guide at least a lot in a drift boat, I was pretty excited to give one of those a try at some point. So, kind of, you jumped in a little bit, talked about sort of environmental impact on products. How do you view, your organization is really promoting people getting out there? How do you guys think about NRS's role in conservation, access advocacy, all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's super critical to who we are. Gosh, I dug up sometime from time to time. I'll like go back through the catalog archive and I don't know, for research or whatever. And I found, I think it was a catalog from the early '80s, and Bill used the opening spread of the catalog to try to get people to sign up for American whitewater and American rivers, and to help fight for their rivers. And we've always taken that approach that the more people recreate outdoors and fall in love with it, the more likely they are to stand up for these places and help take care of them. So, that's how we try to approach it. We do, obviously, if you follow us online, you see that we, do a lot of education on these topics. We work really closely with nonprofit partners all over the world to do this. It's not just, I don't even think of it as marketing. I think of it, again, as like, embodying our values in the public sphere. We want to walk the walk. And so we've always taken our philosophy on that has been like, we don't ever want to be the brand that just like sends a nonprofit a check and that's the end of it. It's like, our field marketing manager, Danny Mongo, uses the analogy like, we don't just sponsor the fun run to get our logo on the shirt. We're going to be there handing out bananas at the aid station, right? We want to roll up our sleeves and get dirty and get down in the muck and do that work. Sorry, just a moment.
Yep.
I got a
Totally.
incoming call. There we go. And so that's what we try to do. Find ways to really engage in these organizations that we're partnering with. I mentioned, I think earlier that, I intended to study environmental law at the University of Idaho. And, fortunate for me that, while I didn't pursue that path, I was able to still get to work in, that conservation movement through my job here. And that's one of the things that I enjoy most about my role. And, this spring I traveled to Washington, D.C. with the Conservation Alliance and got to represent NRS and NRS customers, in meetings, at the White House and the BLM and the Forest Service and Capitol Hill, coming from Idaho, lends a lot of credibility in certain circles in Washington, and that's just one example of the kinds of things that we do. But yeah, it's all, again, in terms of that like marketing philosophy of earning trust and building long lasting relationships. I think our customers expect us to be doing that work, and that's one of the things that draws them to NRS and makes them feel loyal to our brand, and it makes us feel good too, because we care about this stuff. We're out there on our rivers and on our public lands, and when those things are a threat, we get after it.
That's awesome. I'll get towards the end here. I know you've got we're taking up your time, and you probably got a lot to do. But what is one thing that you wish more people understood about NRS that maybe doesn't come through your marketing, or you feel like is missed?
Well, one of the catch-22s of being good at my job, I guess, is that as NRS, has kind of like we've raised the stature of the brand and the company, and we've gone from that, old pole barn at the edge of town that you remember going to when you were young to, a beautiful new building on the east side of Moscow here. With that success, can come the impression that like NRS is some kind of like giant corporate monolith, which I don't think could be farther from the truth. I really feel strongly that like the reason that we have had this success is just because we are just like a company of really dedicated, hardworking people pulling together to do big things alongside one another. And I think, when people come to visit, they get that experience, right? We had a a number of like large national accounts come in this spring, and got to give them a tour of the building. And we do things a very different way here. It is a really very people-driven company, but for a company our size, most companies our size, they're outsourcing a lot of things, right? They're using a third-party logistics company for their warehousing and shipping. They're using an outside marketing firm for their marketing and their marketing communications. They're, like we do darn near everything in-house. So if you were to walk through this building, you would see our frame shop crew manufacturing raft frames, and you would see Tyler stuffing rope in throw bags, and you would see a photo studio where we take all the pictures of our products for our website and our catalogs. You would see a giant warehouse with a bunch of people pushing carts around and packing boxes and loading trucks. You would see a repair facility where we're doing full stack dry suit repairs, and boat repairs for outfitter customers, and manage our own warranties and exchanges here, and on and on and on. And I think for us, it's like one, we're a pillar of we're a really important piece of our small town community here in Moscow, and NRS provides a lot of really good jobs for people, and we take that really seriously. And I don't want to move our shipping to Salt Lake City to some big international company. I want to keep it here, and I want to keep those people employed. I want we have real people answering phones and emails. It's not bots. It's not somebody in a call center in some far-flung place. They're right here down the hall from me. And I think that's what makes NRS special. And it is just like a really successful, very grassroots company.
Yeah, it always, I think, spoke to me as someone who's passionate about Idaho and the outdoor industry in Idaho and everything else. When you guys built that new building and kind of moved in, it seemed like there was a moment there where you had the opportunity to probably move somewhere that would be more efficient, and chose not to, chose to double down on where you are, which from a company your size and the industry that you're in, I can imagine probably didn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but it was pretty awesome to see.
Yeah. I mean, if an MBA consultant walked in here and was like, hey, how do we make this company more profitable or whatever, they would just be like, what are you guys doing? But again, the how is the why, right? Like that's why we're still here, is because of how we do things, and having all that in-house and managing all that in-house with employee owners in those roles is it allows us to be really responsive to customer requests. Whether it's like, hey, I got a big Middle Fork, launch tomorrow, and we had problems with 2 boats. Can you get me boats by Wednesday, or by tonight or whatever? Like sometimes we've actually heck yeah, we got a guy driving down there that direction later this afternoon. We'll send out a company-wide email like, hey, anybody going to Boise? And
you guys literally did that for me multiple times.
There you go. But we can do that because it's all here and it's all us, right? We can be that responsive, and that is the special sauce, and without that, we aren't here.
That's awesome.
And so it's not going to change.
Well, Mark, anything else you want to let our listeners know about NRS, or anything else?
No, I don't think so. I've taken up a lot of airspace here, but just shout out to all your listeners. Love what you all do. I had a chance to be on the main salmon earlier this summer, and love seeing running into friends on the water, seeing all these great companies out there doing their thing. Just we live in such a special place, and the role that our guides and outfitters play in our Idaho heritage and the culture here and our communities is just massive, and Thank you all. Keep up the good work, and I hope to see you on the water.
Well, thanks, Mark. Thanks for taking your time and chatting with us today. I really appreciate it, and appreciate everything NRS does for sort of the outfitting, guiding, and river running community. So you guys have been a
Thanks,
staple
Erik.
for a long time.
It's great talking to you. I really appreciate it.
All right. We'll see you again soon.
Okay.
Thanks to Mark for joining us today, and thank you for coming in and listening to hear what's going on with the industry. All you outfitters and guides who are out in the field, hopefully listening to this in the shuttle rig, thanks for the hard work that you're doing, for getting up early, going to bed late, and sharing our incredible state with those people who are going to come, fall in love with it, and be advocates for it in the future. Please reach out if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for future episodes. You can email Jack at IOGA.org. If you like this episode, subscribe, tell your outfitter and guide friends, leave reviews, I guess. I think that's a thing. But most importantly, if you're not a member of IOGA, please consider joining. And if you are a member, it's time to renew. Hardy's been calling you, I promise. It is the support of our members that allows us to continue our efforts advocating for this community. Thanks so much, and we will hopefully see you back here. Maybe not next week. We got stuff going on, but hopefully the week after. Have a good one out there, and you're halfway through Angry August. You can make it. We believe in you. You've got this.
Yeehaw.
Thanks, guys.